In this video, we're talking about qualified and restored books. Are they super undervalued? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, I wanted to give you my 12 cents on qualified and restored comic books. I've been thinking about these two things a lot because in this current market, given what the prices are for, all these books setting new records, I think that the qualified and restored books might be significantly undervalued. So I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about it, show you some examples, and maybe together, we can sort of have this conversation and figure out if qualified and restored comic books might be, slept on in a way and might be the next big thing when it comes to the comic book collecting community. But before I get into this video today, if you guys could drop me a like or a comment or subscribe if you're enjoying my content, love interacting with you guys, and please let's have this conversation in this one because I'm really curious to hear what you guys have to say. So to back it up a little bit, why I kind of have been thinking about this topic a lot is because, like I'm sure a lot of you guys have been following stuff on eBay, and I'm always, hunting books and everything. And there was a certain sale that a bid that I lost out on recently for a Fantastic Four 49. I had been following this live auction, and I was hoping that I can, snipe a good deal on this low grade book. And I ended up losing it because it went for way more expensive than I would have thought that it would have gone for. And it was a pretty beat up copy. And meanwhile, there was this restored book for, and actually a CGC slabbed Fantastic Four 49 that sold for quite a bit less than this raw book, and the raw book was a much lower grade. And that really got me thinking, like, why wouldn't I just target these restored books, especially if they don't have that much restoration on them? So this is a really interesting topic to me. And additionally, I've been thinking more and more about qualified books that have, Marvel value stamps cut out. And when I really think about it, just to jump into the main portion of my argument right now is, why do I really care if a Marvel value stamp is cut out, but somehow that makes the comic book qualified? But if I have a comic with a cover where like the corner is completely cut off, and then that one has a blue one, and like for whatever reason, like as far as material is concerned, like the amount of material that is cut out of the book, I would actually rather have my cover complete versus, missing the Marvel value stamp. I mean, once it gets encased, you're never opening that book anyway. So why would you even care that the MVS is cut out? Other than the fact that people have told you that it's a bad thing that the MVS is cut out. But let me pull up some examples here. And I just kind of wanted to, talk about this with you guys and show you some stuff. And we can maybe have this conversation. And there's other things that I want to, analyze and think about, maybe in the future, especially if the prices continue to grow up, some of these books that are, really beat up, and some of these restored comic books might be really attractive to a lot of collectors who, are going to get priced out of the market. But let me show you this one that is really the comic that sparked the whole conversation for me. So one of the books I've been actively, hunting on eBay is a Fantastic Four 49. For those who don't know, this is the second appearance of Silver Surfer and the first full appearance of Galactus. And this has been an extremely hot book. Like, it's crazy what the prices are. I'm kicking myself because over December, I had a chance to get this book for $400, and it was a pretty nice raw copy, but I passed on that. And now I'm definitely kicking myself because it's twice as expensive right now. So here's this latest one that I had been following. It was a live auction. This one sold 54 bids, $811. This was on March 20th. So going into here, this is a raw book. So it's hard to say exactly what grade it is, but it was listed as a 3, right? A GVG. So when I go in here and I look at this book, definitely could benefit from a press, but a lot of wear on it, right? There's a lot of creases, a lot of damage along the edges here. You see there's a big chip right there in the lower right corner. You see these big, massive color breaking creases up here. So, even though for me, like, this doesn't totally bother me, like I would have been happy to get this book at a price that I felt was fair. Obviously a lot of damage here, a lot of damage on the cover, missing corners, things like that. Similarly, if we go to the back, I think the back actually looked pretty decent. Yeah, it did look pretty decent, but there are some like water stains up there, it looks like, and, a couple cuts and rips and things like that. So overall, I would have been happy to get this book at a respectable price, but for $811 for what effectively is a raw book, and on top of that, is presumably a 3, that seems pretty crazy to me as far as a price is concerned. Now, as this book was sold and I was following this auction, I also came across this other book that was listed. It was a CGC 4.0 restored, and it was listed at $800, right? So already listed lower than what we saw in that book. And if we zoom in here, we can see that, qualified up here, restored grade up here. Restoration includes small amount of color touch on the cover. And when I look at this book, compared to the last one, look at this thing. There's hardly any color breaks on this, right? Hardly any color breaks. You see a couple there on the left, a little bit one there on the right on the corner, and a small chip right there on the bottom. And at the top here, actually pretty good. Definitely low grade, but as far as presentability and cover, I think that this book actually looks pretty good, right? Compared to this one right here, which has a ton of color breaks and creases and chips and all that sort of thing. So this one is really interesting. And so needless to say, it's listed at $800 here, right? So if we do our trick, right, and we go to view page source, let's see what this actually sold at. Tax X here. We scroll over, and what did this sell at? Tax exclusive price, $630. Right there you see $630. So this book, 4.0, higher grade, presumably, than this 3.0, presents better. Granted, it has a small amount of color touch on it. This one sold for $170 less than, no, even more than that, $181 less. This one sold $181 less for that raw copy. So that really got me thinking, what is it against restored books that is so awful? Because when I think of other collectible industries or other sort of niche passion industries that people are really excited about, restoration actually isn't viewed as such a bad thing. For instance, if you are a car collector and you want to collect old automobiles, restoration is just a part of that industry. People will supplement old materials with new ones, and it doesn't usually affect the value of that old car. Granted, you technically need new materials to, presumably run that engine. Whereas in this thing, comic book, you don't need to replace the pages necessarily in order to be able to get it to work. But in the car thing, you do. So maybe it's not a perfect example, but generally speaking, restored cars is just a part of the game. Similarly, restored Rolex watches, things like that keep their value. Restored Rolex watches, generally speaking, as long as they have the main core parts that came with that original Rolex, they will actually maintain their value. Similarly, in the art world, right? If we're talking about oil paintings or things in museums, which I think comic books are a form of art, and it's a similar sort of modern day version of that. Paintings and things that are kept in museums often have restoration done to them, and hardcore art collectors and enthusiasts of that market don't usually care, so long as the restoration is done professionally and looks generally pretty good. People don't knock the value for that specific piece of artwork. So that really got me thinking, why is, as a comic book community, do we care so much that there's been restoration done to a certain comic book? Now, granted, I think that there are certain kinds of restoration that, generally speaking, are always going to be frowned upon. I think trimming, for instance, as soon as you trim a cover, that definitely feels bad. But as far as a little bit of color touch, or, presumably, let's say we have some of those square bound books, if there's a little bit of glue that keeps that cover just more secure than what it was, I don't know if I have a problem with that. Let me know in the comments if you guys have a problem with that. But I feel like just from a preservation standpoint, why would we be so upset about having a little bit of glue keeping that cover on, more than what it currently was? So that's something that's really, really interesting to me. And that got me thinking too, similarly with the restored books, well, what about the qualified books? Why are we so anti the qualified books? And one thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is, there's a understanding that within the comic book community, old books that have certain stamps on it, like, because it was a part of the history, right? It had a dated stamp from back in the 60s. A Silver Age book might have something like that on the cover. Or, people used to put tape on their staples, for instance, when, they had it when they were kids in the 60s. And none of those factors ever have any sort of like play in CGC's grading of them. They don't frown upon them, so to speak. Whereas, when we flash forward to the 70s, we have a lot of people who cut out these Marvel value stamps. And when I really, really think about it, like, isn't that also just sort of a part of the mythos of the comic book collecting industry? Like, that there was a time when Marvel was printing these Marvel value stamps and people would humorously cut them out. I mean, I guess humorously or cynically, depending on how you want to look at it as a comic book collector. But, people would cut these things out because they were whatever. They were collecting them, or they were sending in a coupon or doing that sort of thing. And for me, like, in a weird sort of way, I feel like that's part of the story. That's part of the history of the comic book industry, and specifically that respective comic book that had that thing done to it. Like, that's a little bit a part of it. It's not like, it affects the story, or I understand, if people don't want to own comic books that had a panel cut out. But if I'm really thinking about it, right, like if I had a perfectly beautiful Hulk 181, like perfect, beautiful cover, right, where the whole thing is complete and I had it in a CGC case, but the Marvel value stamp was cut out of it, would I rather have, especially if it's entombed like that, wouldn't I rather have a complete cover with an MVS cutout versus, like, let's say that, the cover that I had that was entombed had like a massive corner cut out of it where it was like the equal amount of paper material on the cover as the value stamp. And so to me, I'm like, well, isn't it better that the cover is totally intact? So for that reason, it really has just gotten me thinking, like, is the market going to eventually catch up to this sort of thing? Is new money or new collectors not going to really care so much about restoration and qualified, labels? Because here's the thing, like, if I think about myself getting back into the industry, if someone didn't tell me that, oh, missing the Marvel value stamp is a bad thing, if no one ever told me that, I mean, I don't think personally I would have, viewed it as such a bad thing. Like, to me, it's like that green label has just sort of morphed into like this scarlet letter within the comic book collecting community. And for me, it's like, well, why? Why is it so bad that there was a time in history in the 70s when people used to cut out these things and collect them or whatever? That's just sort of a part of the history. But I wanted to show you guys a couple more examples, specifically of the Hulk 181 thing. So let me pull that up right here. And I think this is just really, really interesting. So here's this Hulk 180 run, right? Here's a 3.5 CGC blue label that sold for $2,801. This was on March 21st, right? And if I look down here, look at that corner, complete like missing corner. So if we're going pound for pound as far as material that is missing from a book, I mean, granted, I know that that's a little bit smaller, but typically speaking, that's almost like the size of a value stamp, right? So, if I compare that to something like this is a 3.5 that has a qualified label where the value stamp is missing. I mean, you look at this cover, like this cover presents a lot better than this one right here because this has this complete thing missing. So, for the same book, this one sold for $600 less, $2,200, being the same grade, but this one's qualified because it's missing the Marvel value stamp, although it's effectively the same amount of material that overall is missing from the book. And, being that it's in a CGC entombed case, it feels like you would rather have the one that has the better presenting cover. Similarly, there's another book here that sold, this one's an even higher grade, 4.5, Incredible Hulk 181. This one has that page 10 missing, does not affect story incomplete. But, I'll pull up page 10 in a second, but this one, definitely a higher grade and still selling for $500 less than the 3.5 version, which is the non-qualified label. And, this one is kind of interesting when we look at these things because this is a part of history, right? This is the time when this is page 10 within the Hulk 181. People would cut out the Marvel value stamp here because I guess they wanted to collect them. And then here's these like little send-ins and coupons and things like that kids would probably cut out. And they were like, oh, buy 12 comics for the price of 8, and they send these things in. And so these pages would be missing. And that's just sort of like a part of the history of these comic books. So I don't know. It's really interesting to me that we put so much like onus on books not being qualified or not being restored when other hobby and other industries actually have restoration as a part of them regularly. So let me know what you guys think. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this, and especially given where the market is going and how these prices keep going up and up and up, like maybe some of these qualified and restored books are really, you know, great ways for people to get their hands on these things, because as the prices continue to get ridiculous and people get priced out of certain grails that they want to get their hands on, like why wouldn't you just grab this one over here that, you know, effectively presents better than other, you know, books that are lower grade that are, you know, have the blue label on it. I mean, I think the only reason that you would stop wanting to get it is because you have your own bias that you know you've been told that a green label is bad or a purple label is bad. But really, to me, like, I don't know, the more and more I think about it and the more I look at these prices, the more I think, like, you know, what's really so wrong with a little bit of color touch on the cover, or really what's so wrong about, you know, some kid in the 70s cutting out a value stamp. I just feel like that's a part of the history. Anyways, I would really love to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. Drop me a like, comment, or subscribe if you are enjoying my content. That's all I got for this video, and I will see you in the next one.